How to tell a good story. That's a very important skill. For example, if you want to have a presentation in public or if you want your video to be watched till the end, you have to tell a good story. Good news is you can learn it by practicing and applying basic storytelling principles. I'll show you the 3 most important ingredients that every good story needs in this video. First, you need to understand what a story is. Before people had books to share information or even social media, before people had other ways to share information, they had stories. Storytelling is the oldest craft of mankind because it was essential for survival. Learn from mistakes by stories. Hear of dangers by stories. It's key to survival. Therefore, the first thing a story has to be is memorable. Then, the audience needs to connect to the story. And how does the audience connect to a story best? Emotion. We remember things better if they're connected with emotion. Therefore, what a story basically is, it is a memorable, emotional moment that we want to share. That's what a story has to be, but how do we tell a good story? When you tell a story, it typically follows something called the story arc. It starts with the exposition, then it goes into the rising action to the climax of the story, goes into the falling action, and then the resolution of the story. In the exposition, you give the audience the chance to connect to your story. Where does it happen? What's the setup of the story? What's the circumstances of the story? Ideally, it's something that people can refer to. Ideally, the story is about them, not about you. That's the skill of telling a good story. Create the impression that the story is actually about the audience. They can connect to your story. So let me give you an example story here to tell you exactly what happens here. And just for easy reference, I'll pretend the story is about me. I've known this woman for only 1 week and she was the dream of my life and we wanted to marry so bad. We only knew for 1 week, we planned our marriage. Our marriage is already tomorrow. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? So that's the setup of the story. Now we go straight into the rising action to the climax. On the rising action, there are problems that have to be resolved. How can he survive the danger? On the way to the climax where everything seems to go wrong. And we, the audience, we wonder what the character will do. How can he survive the danger? This is a primal, mankind, old instinct. We want to know how to survive. Back to the wedding example. So we wake up that morning of the wedding and we're late. The wedding is in 10 minutes. There's almost no way to get there. And now the dog is ill. The dog's ill. What are we gonna do? We're hopeless. We have to go to the doctor with the dog, but we have to be at the marriage and 100 people are waiting there for the marriage. Big trouble. After the climax is reached, we go into the falling action. The main problem has been resolved. Either the main character was successful or he wasn't. But anyways, the audience knows what happened. We as an audience could learn or relate. Let's go on with the wedding story. Thanks to the help of a neighbor that brought the dog to the doctor, we could solve that problem. And his wife had a car, so she drove us to the wedding and we were there on time and everything was fine. Isn't that a nice resolution to the story? And that goes directly into the resolution. What's that about? The resolution is we made it. But what the audience is more interested in is how has the character changed during the story? That's what we really want to know. What has he learned? How has he changed? All the obstacles he's taken. And is there a closed loop? That's a technique that is often used in stories, which is basically the story starts in the same place where it ended. This closes the story arc, how you tell a good story. But that's not all. You need more for the story to be interesting for the viewer. What really happens during the story arc? You create those emotions. Remember, we've spoken of emotions. You create emotions within the audience, and that's what really keeps the audience listening. And this is the second ingredient of a good story. There is basically 3 hormones that are released within the audience when you're telling a good story. Those 3 hormones, the good ones, are called the angel's cocktail. You want to create that angel's cocktail of hormones within the audience. This is what makes a good story interesting. First one's oxytocin. Oxytocin is created with empathy and is very, very relevant for creating relationships. For example, speaking of the wedding, that's a story that a lot of the audience can relate to, and a lot of the audience has emotions, speaking of first love, love at first sight, and the wedding. And that creates a relationship between the storyteller and the audience. What I said before, the story really is about the audience. The next one is dopamine, and that's very important for thrilling stories. It's released when there is suspense, like a cliffhanger. Again, it's just nature, because if you hear there are problems, you want to know how they're resolved. You get focused, you want the solution, and that keeps you stuck to a story. That's why it's used so much in stories. But there's more. To make the story really interesting, you need the third one, and the third one is endorphin. Endorphin is the hormone that is released within our bodies when we laugh, when we're relaxed. It makes us happy. We have a laugh if something goes wrong, if something funny happens. Basically, if something turns out differently than we expected. And we relax when problems are resolved. So this is the angel's cocktail: oxytocin, dopamine, and endorphin. That's what happens in the bodies of the audience. And that's the second ingredient that is very important to tell a good story and have the audience on your lips. A typical example of this is how jokes are told. They're typically built in what's the setup and the punchline. Now the setup is nothing different than oxytocin, dopamine. We have a little story where we make the audience connect, and we make a problem into that, something that could go wrong or has gone wrong, basically raising expectations within the audience. And then going into the punchline, something unexpected, funny happens, and then all the endorphin is released, we relax and we laugh. That was how you tell a story with the story arc, and that is what the story creates within the audience, how to create the emotions and make it a memorable story. But there is one more ingredient that you need to have it to make it a really good story, and that's called the universal theme. It's very important to make the story memorable and relatable. Some call it the thing under the thing, or the deeper moral of the story. Every good story has it. It's things like in the wedding example, if people help each other, problems can be resolved. Never give up. Everything is possible if you try. Those are universal themes that we love to see in stories. Or the underdog becoming successful. Those are universal themes, and you want your story to be about that. Now, what is very important, the universal theme is usually not voiced. And I would actually recommend not to voice it, because people will understand it anyways. It's the core of your story. They'll just know. You don't have to tell it. It's actually very weird if at the end of a story you say what the universal theme of the story is. So don't do it. But think of it before you even start telling your story. Why do you tell the story? This is basically the why of the story. Or the why should I even care about this story? So here's the resolution and closed loop of this story. Those are the 3 ingredients that every good story needs to be a memorable, emotional moment. The universal theme is the why of the story. Why should I care? How do I tell it? It's a story arc and the angel's cocktail. What emotions do I create within the audience? And I hope you like this video. And please subscribe to StorySpotlight for more amazing stories. See you in the next video. Bye.